Well, here we are again with another episode of History by Lou. And today's topic is the Industrial Revolution, Part 4 of 4. This one will deal with inventors who made a difference in our lives. While you're watching this and listening to it, I want you to ask yourself, what was the greatest invention of all time? And then likewise, who was the greatest inventor of this period? And finally, which invention changed America the most? So as you listen to this episode, I want you to ask yourself those questions. Now, here we go. Let's get going. So today we're going to take a look at the inventors who changed America in the beginning, the antebellum period between 1790 and 1860. So who were some of the inventors of this antebellum period? They were Eli Whitney, who in 1793 came up with the cotton gin, and that revolutionized that whole industry and, in fact, laid the groundwork that would eventually lead to the conflict we call the Civil War. Jethro Woods, Cyrus McCormick, John Deere, Samuel Colt, Samuel F.B. Morse, Thomas Davenport, Charles Goodyear, Richard M. Hoe, Elias Howe, Isaac Singer, Elisha Otis, Edwin Drake, and Cyrus Fields. Now, there are many more than this, but these are a few that we'll highlight today to at least get the point that there was a lot of creativity going on in the early days of America. It was very common in the 19th century and into the 20th century for the people, men especially, to be cigar smokers. And they would put these decorative, artistic, commercial paintings on the cigar boxes. And this is one from the period, and it features famous American inventors. From the left to the right, we have Eli Whitney for the cotton gin inventor, Robert Fulton, who's given credit for the steamboat, Thomas Edison, who later invents the light bulb, Cyrus McCormick, the mechanical reaper, Richard Hoe, the automatic printing press, which revolutionized books and newspapers. Jethro Woods was a man in 1819 who made a plow of cast iron, but he made it in three parts, so the broken part might be replaced without purchasing an entire plow. This principle of standardization soon became widespread. Seems obvious to us today, but at that time it was a great intellectual breakthrough. Cyrus McCormick, this is a young picture of him. In 1831, at the tender age of 22, McCormick invented the first successful mechanical reaper, which later led to harvesting machine industry. McCormick ushered in a new era of agricultural mechanization. Now, fewer farmers could feed more people. And that then made it possible for millions of people to leave the farms for jobs and careers in the new cities and factories. The idea and the way that we have harvested has not changed for over 5,000 years. The reaping and harvesting, maybe even before 3000 BC, up to this 1831 period. Cyrus McCormick became known then as the father of modern agriculture. Building on the work of his father, we often have these inventors who had to look to earlier inventions and simply build on them. He invented a mechanical horse-drawn reaper in 1831. Now, reaping is the process of harvesting a crop. It includes cutting the grain or pulses, the seeds or legumes, using a scythe, a sickle, or a reaping machine, and it's very hard work. The mechanical reaper increased the farmer's yield by tenfold and allowed farmers to greatly expand the amount of land they would have under cultivation. McCormick, after a slow start, became wealthy producing reapers and other mechanical farm implements in his Chicago factories. His reaper played an important role in opening up Western lands to farming. Cyrus McCormick, and here's a picture of him when he is old and he's very rich. And the picture at the top is actually a reproduction of the original reaper from 1831. It was pretty primitive, but it worked, and that was the important thing. And it was easy to reproduce as well. Then there's a man called John Deere. Now, Deere knew that Jethro Woods' iron plows were not working well in the tough western prairie soil where farmers were now headed. In 1837, he invented a steel plow that easily moved through the western soils. His plows were a commercial success, and the company he founded is still a major player in the agricultural machinery industry, and it's also in the other industrial machinery areas as well. John Deere plows moved across the continent in wagon trains, helping settle the far west and turn it into a rich agricultural farming country. John Deere invented a steel plow that cut through land that in the past could not be cultivated with iron plows. He went on to build a large agricultural implement business. And there you see the simple plow that he designed in the lower right. The old Colt. Samuel Colt constructed the first practical multi-shot revolving breech loading pistol in 1836. With investors, he began a company, but they were not successful until the outbreak of the Mexican War in 1846. The war brought orders from the government for thousands of Colt revolvers. The new company, Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing, was a success, and in the early 1850s, Colt built the world's largest arms factory. Colt's pistols before the 1860s, however, did not fire bullets. They hadn't quite improved that yet. They were cap and ball weapons, still a little crude, but they worked. Here's an 1847 Colt Walker pistol. It was used by the Texas Rangers. 18-year-old Samuel Colt here. He first experimented with pistol design while on a long sea voyage with missionaries in 1832. Thomas Davenport and his wife, Emily. In 1834-35, Thomas Davenport, with the aid of his wife Emily, invented the first electric motor. In 1837, he received the first patent for a machine run by electricity. His electric motor was used to run lathes, drills, and a printing press. His invention was ahead of its time, however, because electricity as a power source would not come into play until the latter part of the 19th century. But he had the ideas, and the basic invention began with him. Charles Goodyear. Natural rubber was used for waterproofing and other applications. However, natural, or India rubber as it was called, had several problems that made it of little practical value. In hot weather, rubber melted, and in cold weather, it froze and cracked. Charles Goodyear, a small businessman and inventor, spent many years trying to develop a process that would make rubber a commercial product, and that was common. His many failed experiments, they often experimented one thing after the other, and they just kept at it. And he used in the beginning dangerous chemicals that almost ruined his health and caused his family to live in poverty. Finally, he did discover what we know the vulcanization process to be that solved the problems with rubber, and he patented it in 1844. Unfortunately, he wasn't successful in marketing his vulcanized rubber, and he himself died in poverty in 1860. And interestingly, he had no connection with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, which was founded in 1898. They simply took his name and have applied it to their company. Here you see rubber trees and some of the things that were part of making that production happen. In 1843, Richard Hoe invented the rotary printing press, which allowed much faster printing than the old style printing press. Now, up till this time, all printing was one page at a time, either one page of a newspaper or one page of a book. And so this was a tremendous breakthrough that allowed literacy and the spread of ideas in a way that was just never thought of before. With Hoe's design, more cylinders could be placed around the main cylinder, moving much faster in one direction. Some versions of the press were able to create up to 20,000 impressions per hour. And here is a couple of the machines that he built. Hoe's rotary printing press revolutionized printing and made the modern newspaper industry possible. And here are some of the versions of his Hoe's press. Now, some of them were very primitive, very small. You could use them for small applications, and others were industrial that the major newspapers began to use. Isaac Singer, and the sewing machine. Elias Howe invented the first practical sewing machine in 1845, but he was unable to successfully market the product either in the U.S. or abroad, and marketing is important in any product. On his return from Europe, many designers modified his machine. The most successful of these was a man by the name of Isaac Singer. who was able to sell them commercially on a large scale. So Elias Howe, there is the machine that he invented, and he was truly a true genius to come up with this idea. It allowed women at home to begin to sew. And this little Singer advertisement has a lady at her sewing machine saying, "Now I can sew my clothes in half the time." And so it really revolutionized how people lived in their homes as well. Improved the quality of life for everyone. Isaac Merrick Singer himself was an actor, inventor, and businessman who founded the Singer Sewing Machine Company in the mid-19th century. Although he did not invent the sewing machine, he was the first to mass market as a household appliance. Although Singer, Howe, and several other manufacturers had originally fought over the sewing machine patents, they ultimately decided to cooperate. The machines were made by several companies. Singer's company was the most successful since its installment plan allowed almost every household to purchase its own sewing machine, and then they could pay on time. I.M. Singer and Company expanded its business around the world. Singer himself became fabulously rich. He retired in 1863 to spend more time with his families and 18 children. So Isaac Singer was doing more than just marketing sewing machines. Here is a picture of Isaac Merrick Singer and an early Singer sewing machine. And the sewing machines of today are essentially the same. They're just run by electricity and they're just a little bit more sophisticated looking, but it's the same principle that's involved. And here are some of the companies that were rivals. One there you could see Empire Sewing Machine Company. And of course, a good idea always spreads and others try to imitate it. Elijah Otis. Elijah Otis, a master mechanic, developed a safety brake that prevented elevators from crashing. His company had financial problems until he demonstrated his safety elevator brake at the Crystal Palace Exposition, the U.S.'s first World's Fair. His business took off when he began constructing passenger elevators in 1857. Otis himself died in 1861, but his sons greatly expanded the business. Otis's safety elevators are often credited for making possible the skyscrapers, tall buildings with many floors, that transformed America's cities. Without his invention, you could not have skyscrapers. And if you sometimes ride in an elevator, you will see the name Otis on the wall. The elevator was a critical invention that made tall buildings possible. Before the elevator, buildings went no more than 6 floors high. Transatlantic cable telegraph. The first cable crossed the Atlantic Ocean from Valentia Island in Western Ireland to Newfoundland. The transatlantic cable connecting North America with Europe, making communications possible in minutes rather than the usual days by ship, was an incredible invention. A stable connection was established in 1866, and more cables were laid down before the turn of the century. And if you take a map and find it, there are cables running all the way through all of the oceans of the world, connecting us. We are an interconnected world, and this is before we had the electronic age. Here is a 19th century diagram that shows it as the 8th wonder of the world, with the British lion on the left and the American eagle on the right. Just a fanciful way of portraying this great event. There's an 1865 engraving that includes scenes of people related to the laying of the Atlantic telegraph cable and the invention of the telegraph, including Benjamin Franklin, Cyrus Field, and Samuel Morse. President Andrew Johnson is shown reading the morning news from Europe, and Queen Victoria reading the news from America, with the cable-laying ship in the center. The completion of the transatlantic cable was celebrated as one of the great events of history, and it was. There's no question about it. Edward Drake is called the father of the petroleum industry. Petroleum had been known and used for thousands of years. However, it could only be obtained from naturally occurring oil seepages and was therefore relatively rare. In the 19th century, oil for lamps was obtained from sperm whales, which had been almost hunted to extinction. Petroleum, after being refined into kerosene, was found to be an excellent whale lamp oil replacement. The roadblock to widespread use was its limited supply. Drake came up with the idea of drilling through pipes driven into the ground. This prevented water seepage, and oil could now be successfully pumped out of underground deposits. Unfortunately, Drake made nothing from his invention, and his family lived in near poverty until the state of Pennsylvania gave him a $1,500 a year per pure pension in 1873. Petroleum soon became the major source of lubricants and energy products, and this is before the advent of the automobile and other major machines that use internal combustion. It went from virtually none being produced in 1859 to more than 140 million barrels by 1906. And of course, this has continued to grow throughout the years and has fueled the automobile industry and all of the other industries that depend on internal combustion. This is a picture that depicts the primitive nature of the first wells, the towers that they used in order to drill wells. Then we go to Samuel F.B. Morse, the inventor of the telegraph. Morse, who was really an artist, an inventor, and a college professor, demonstrated in 1835 that signals could be transmitted by wire using electricity. He received $30,000, the equivalent of $1.25 million today, in 1843 from the government to build an experimental telegraph line between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. In 1844, the first message was sent between the two cities. In the following years, Morse and his partners expanded their lines to several others. Soon, several small telegraph companies were operating. In 1861, the Western Union Company built the first transcontinental telegraph system. Until the invention of the telephone in 1877, the telegraph was the only long-distance method of communication. And when it came into being in 1861 with Western Union, that also put the Pony Express out of business after its year and a half of existence. Here's a painting by Morse of his daughter, Susan, in 1837. He was, in fact, a very talented artist. And here you see pictures of him at different stages of his life. We can tell that he was good at growing beards, as many in the 1835, he proved that signals could be transmitted by wire, and he invented the Morse code, which used dots and dashes to transmit messages. In 1838, Congress funded construction of an experimental telegraph line from Washington to Baltimore, a distance of 40 miles. The first official message, quote, "What hath God wrought?" close quote, opened the completed line on May 24, 1844. Here is a message from a report in Texas. Another Texas message by Morse's magnetic telegraph in 1844. This is, and then over on the left, you see the man exclaiming at the newspaper report that he's receiving that was sent by telegraph. This is a slide also when there were Lincoln-Douglas debates in Illinois in 1858. It turned out that the entire text of their debates was sent by telegraph, so it was being read the next day in New York and Washington and Boston and so forth. Brilliant breakthrough. Here are telegraph instruments. The original telegraph receiver used in Baltimore to receive the first telegraph message on May 24, 1844, and then a more modern version from 1844-45. And the telegraph transmitter has not changed a great deal since then for dots and dashes. In the 19th century, late 19th century, in the first part of the 20th century, however, one of the most important jobs was to be a telegrapher because it was the way in which messages were sent. This is before really long distance telephone, and certainly before the internet and everything else that has followed. So this was a very important job during that period. And the first telegraphic message was that one, quote, "What hath God wrought?" Close quote. So this was an important thing that was a fake. It has widely been quoted that this phrase, "everything that can be invented has been invented," by Charles Dewey. In 1889, Charles H. Dewey was the commissioner of the U.S. Patent Office. He's widely quoted as having stated that the Patent Office would soon shrink in size and eventually close because everything that can be invented has been invented. We all know that was absolutely untrue, and actually the incident is untrue, but it makes a good story. There is one from an earlier time in 1843 by an earlier Patent Office Commissioner, Henry Ellsworth, where he said, the advancement of the arts from year to year taxes our credulity and seems to presage the arrival of that period when human improvement must end, saying that we aren't going to go any further. We've gone about as far as we can go. And both of those, of course, we know were absolutely false. And if you think everything has been invented, just pick up the newspaper on any given day and you will see many more new inventions. So that is the end of this little discussion for today of inventors. These were geniuses who worked hard to create what America today would become. So remember to hit the subscribe and like buttons so I can be encouraged to create more history by Lou just for you. Thank you very much for watching.